of aspects of what you've all just said that just are horrifying to me, and I don't even know if I could read it.
There's a little bit of a love story too, Rose.
What makes you think I like love stories?
Oh, there's an old romantic in you. Well, I went to St. Norbert College outside of Green Bay, pre-med, and felt pretty confident I'd get to medical school, and went to the University of Chicago then for med school, where there was no family medicine department. And I had this sense that I was looking for something kind of holistic in medicine. And along the way, I had heard about this educational activity called CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education. And I'd heard it in the context of a couple of seminarians dreading having to do it. And as I heard about what it involved, thinking about people very holistically in jails or mental hospitals or hospitals, I thought, oh my God, this is what's missing in my medical school curriculum. Everything felt very reductionistic. Histology, the cells, the organelles, the molecules. And as I explored it more, I thought this might be a really fun thing to do for a bit, but they either do it for a quarter, for 3 months, or for a year. And if I did it for a quarter, I'd be way out of sync with medical school and residencies. So I applied and was accepted for a 1-year participation in it. When I went to tell my dean that I was hoping to do this and needed his blessing, he told me that I was either the wisest or the dumbest medical student they'd ever had, and time would tell. That was how he sort of cast me off and said, I guess we've had students do sillier things than this. And so and that year really, in lots of ways, made me a family doctor, really stopping to think about what I brought to healing for people as a person in my presence, and attuned to other elements or aspects of people's lives. So fast forward, I then trained as a family doctor in Northern California from 1988 to 1991, which was essentially the heart of the AIDS crisis. And I was in a town 60 miles north of San Francisco and about 10 miles east of a gay resort on the Russian River. And a lot of men left San Francisco to go up there to die. And they ended up being cared for by one of our faculty members in a USPHS funded site. And we took care of them in the hospital. And for all 3 years of my residency, pneumocystis pneumonia and ARDS was the #1 diagnosis on our internal medicine service. And we had between 5 and 10 young men a week dying from AIDS complications. And it was powerful, really powerful medicine, not just all the pathophysiology and the different presentations of the complications, but people dying cut off from their families, creating new community and the activism around that sort of stuff. And I feel like an old fart in the 40s talking about when penicillin became available. But I remember when AZT came along, because our patients stopped dying. It was that dramatic. It was 1 month to the next. So I had a lot of exposure to end of life at that point. A lot of it I wish I would have managed better. I just didn't know a lot as a young doctor and gained a lot of experience doing it. Practiced full spectrum family medicine then for 8 years in central Minnesota, which included taking care of some people at the end of life, but I was delivering a lot of babies as well. I had a pretty young practice. Left that to go to Dartmouth Medical School, where I wasn't happy for a lot of reasons. And at one point even sought permission from my chair to join the palliative care team. They were just kind of building it up. This is really before fellowships were around and things like that. And he denied it. He wanted to keep me where I was. And so then I left, did my, I stepped through several administrative and leadership roles. And as my role at Fairview was winding down as they reorganized, I had the year before helped organize and lead a leadership academy, an interdisciplinary leadership academy, and chose to use end of life as sort of the theme for the year, to get some good work done around that, because there was there was some work that needed to be done. There was more training that needed to be done for other specialties than just palliative care, what we call primary palliative care and things like that. And got to know Drew Rosiel well. And as I began to think that my role would be eliminated as part of Fairview reorganizing, he and I sat down and I told him I was thinking about palliative medicine, that I wanted to return to the bedside, but I wanted to do it in a supervised fashion, that I didn't think I'd be safe after 8-10 years not practicing. And so he said, he gave me 4 pieces of homework that he expected me to do to sort of test the waters and see what I thought of that. Every time I did, I felt like I was with my tribe and felt more energized about it. And so used some of the time that I had off between my job ending and the applications. I worked with a good friend up in St. Cloud, Pat Lally, and spent time with him in his clinic and time with him at a hospice, that residential hospice he'd founded, and just loved the work. I just thought it was beautiful, and it was really sincere medicine and a lot of good that could be done. So, I then applied to fellowships and had the great fortune of matching in the first class at Aurora St. Luke's. Got to train with you guys at St. Luke's and at Sinai and at Zilber. And now I'm working as a full-time, really busy palliative care doc in a community hospital that's only doing COVID right now. I'm in the old system where I had a leadership role, and they have 10 hospitals, and they converted one of them into a COVID hospital. And it's the hospital I've been working in since last September, and loving most of it and dreading some days from time to time, but it's been great.
It feels like your whole job or your whole career has been leading up to this point.
I think so. But what I have found really fun, and again, being a little older, is it feels like this is a bookend, this COVID stuff, to the AIDS that I started with. Mm. And I try to avoid the back in my day kind of thing. But one of the things I have really come to appreciate is how young some of the critical care specialists are. There's one I work with who I love working with, who finished this fellowship the day I did on June 30th this last year. And now he's an attending. And we consult each other all the time about things. And it's a part of I like my palliative care colleagues in Milwaukee a lot. I like my colleagues on my team, but I love the ICU team that I spend a lot of time with, and those nurses and that staff. I've really grown close with them.
I think it's interesting that, this COVID situation and your, the HIV AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s, there was so much uncertainty. And so at that time and at this time, you're similarly dealing with patients and families, not just with the medical and the fact that it's end of life, but that there's so many unknowns.
Right. And
I'm sure that there's some sort of connection for you there in those two different scenarios.
Yes, Rose. And I, some of it's just the prognostic uncertainty, of what people's futures look like. There's a small little corner of our COVID hospital, which is also an LTAC hospital. And it has a lot of COVID long haul patients in there. And so I just had a fellow that day 87, he got discharged to IPR. And that was after about 60 some days in the COVID ICU. And then whatever the difference is in the LTAC. And I was his continuity. And it was hard seeing him go, because there were 2 points where his wife and 3 sons and I, hours away from deciding to go to comfort care. Mm-hmm. Something sort of made them think, or made the team think, maybe there was a little more going on neurologically. And this guy, he'll do really well. Yeah, I mean, it was so rewarding to be part of that. And that's humbling as well to think that we potentially, and that could have been the right decision as well based on his goals. And there was no guarantee he would have the kind of neurological recovery he did. He really surprised everybody. And so that kind of day-to-day unknown, I feel, but I'm not the one who's going to have to live with it if I make a decision and end up, as my neurologist said, this guy could end up stuck like a 3-year-old. And is that okay for his wife? And is she aware of that? And So it's, I think, a place we can do a lot of good palliative care. Some palliative care.
How do you feel about working in kind of one disease state?
That is a little weird, actually. And I was talking to Drew, who's my clinical boss, about that. And there was a point where I thought about spinning out to another hospital in our part of the system that's very busy, community hospital, out of cancer, you know, the full spectrum of stuff. And I may still do that yet this spring. And what kept me sort of back at St. Joe's was the continuity. There are still patients that I've been with them for weeks and weeks. And that's probably the family doctor in me. I hope it's not too much ego, because I know my colleagues could take as good a care of them. I just feel really strongly that I want to kind of see them through. And this, you know, my COVID hospital may get shut down at some point. We may reach a dip in the state and they'll close it down, and then heck, I'll be moving on. But this is maybe my last chance to really be involved kind of intensity with one disease. And Drew challenged me and said, "Are you sure you remember all of your, you know, opiate conversion factors?" and things like that. And I told them, not always. Just to be safe, look them up. And I think I've got a sufficient scaffolding of knowledge that I could quickly reclaim it. And I think about people like you and Lindsay, you know, who it's CV disease and advanced heart failure in many ways. And, you know, there's tremendous good you can do there. And it can seem clinically limiting, but I know from being with you in clinic, the things the full spectrum of concerns that people bring to you aren't just about their LVAD pump. You know, it's their psych meds, it's their mom seems a bit more confused this week. Is it dementia? Is it stroke? So there's a lot of clinical acumen that you need to bring to things.
That's actually the really fun thing, I'm sure, also about having that family medicine or internal medicine background, when you can kind of dabble in that stuff.
Oh yeah, yes. And I'll admit, it's kind of fun because I work with really smart internists on the hospital service. If every once in a while I pick up on something and get to bring it to their attention. And a doc last week said, "You're like a real doctor. You remembered we should check her ammonia." I said, yes, I am.
Yes, we are.
We all are. Yeah. He didn't mean it in a bad way. I think trying to be complimentary.
Yeah. You're almost at a year out from your fellowship now.
Mm.
Have you noticed anything, any trends, any big changes, anything that you've struggled with or learned, or growing edges, something different your first year out?
You know, I think being able to have goals of care conversations, I think it feels like they keep getting sharper. And I feel like I'm getting slightly more consciously competent having them sometimes. Or Marty, you'll remember that incident when we had that patient with the renal cell cancer in his brain, and the whole brain radiation versus the targeted stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm having more instances where I'm very consciously aware of, you know, the metaphors or how I'm trying to educate or help someone to understand some things. And some of it, and like with being in the COVID hospital, with the volumes like they are and the acuity and just how sick these patients are, I get a chance to sort of test them a little bit, you know, see how they land with the series of people. And also because the Twin Cities is fairly diverse in terms of ethnic backgrounds, I feel like I'm beginning to pick up on some cues and clues and phrases that can be helpful. A small example, we have a lot of Hmong people, and a lot of traditional Hmong people have this practice of dressing a dying person before they die in good clothing. They often look snazzy, and sometimes they're custom made so that people are well dressed for their next journey. And one of the things I picked up last fall when I was dealing with a lot of Hmong families, when I felt like they don't get it, that so-and-so is really sick that the end could be near, is I learned to say, I don't want to alarm you, but have you picked up your father's traveling clothes? Do you have them available? Because we may call you short notice, and I want you to be aware that we may need them. And lots of times family go, it's that bad. And I say, yeah, I think it's that bad. But just paying attention to some of those cues, I feel like I'm getting an edge on.
One of the points of interviewing some of you guys, including you, Patrick, is that you've been in healthcare for so long and you've seen so much. And I'm hoping that maybe you can offer us maybe a couple of things. One is a piece of advice for those of us who are just starting our careers, not just those of us who are doctors and nurses, but chaplains, social workers, everybody who's part of the palliative care team. So that's sort of like a part one. Then part two is, if you could go back in time and talk to a younger version of yourself, what sort of advice would you have given you?
I think the advice, and I don't know that I'm the best person to give it, given my peripatetic career, but it's part of like one of Warren Buffett's business goals or rules for doing business, which is to only work with people that you like, that you enjoy. And I don't mean the patients, but as colleagues, where you have a sense and a choice in that. And there have been times in my life when I worked where I felt that I didn't have a choice. I just had to I should have been better about scrutinizing and assessing a situation and making sure that the people I was going to be working with, which it's kind of trite, but you spend more time with them often than your wife and your kids and whatnot. It's just to really make sure and not to be embarrassed about trying to figure out if you're a good fit with them. And that I think is, I think that can apply to anybody entering, especially an interdisciplinary team, which is, the basis of, palliative care. It's just to really pay attention to that and not be embarrassed if it doesn't look like a fit. It wouldn't mean that you're defective or something. It's just the team doesn't have what you need. And then, I often have conversations with my younger self, like, what were you thinking? But the advice I'd give myself is advice that someone gave me when I was just about 40. So about midpoint in my career, between, not a little sooner than midpoint. But Paul Batalden, who's a quality improvement guru, who was at Dartmouth, and I did some of my master's work with him, who turns out is the grandfather of my son's best friend from high school. And so through these two guys, we got reconnected in lots of ways, and it's been wonderful. But when I was at Dartmouth, working full-time, doing this master's part-time, does it sound familiar to you, Martin, at all? And because it was academic, it was really like, 1.3, 1.4 jobs, because that's partly how academia works.
Sure.
But one day, Paul said to me, it is going to be a great day for you, Patrick, when you realize you have all the time you need to do what's most important. And your job is to figure out what's most important. So instead of feeling frantic or cheated or a victim of too much to do, it's just to get better at paring some of that stuff away.
I think it's amazing advice.
Yeah.
Because you
I wish
really, translate that to even just day-to-day stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be that you're always that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wish, gosh, I would have been a lot happier in college had I sort of taken that to heart. In medical school too, probably.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it even, I think recently we were talking about some of these patient family situations that you've tried everything, right? You've tried to help them on this journey. And at some point, maybe you need to step back. And that doesn't mean you're not doing your job or that you're not a good person or a hard worker, but that you're not getting the almost like bang for your buck, right? You're putting this energy and that sometimes that's just not the right thing to do for you or that other person.
Mm-hmm. Or sometimes, Marty may have heard me say this, sometimes you want to let, an abscess or a wound, ripen a bit before you lance it. And, for an icky-ish metaphor.
Right?
Huh?
Have to be ripe.
Yeah. And having the wisdom to know not to go poking something until it's ready.
Oh man.
Great. Like a zit with a good head on it.
Yes.
I also think it's really fun to interview you, Patrick, because you have, like Marty said, you've been in healthcare all this time, right? But you are also fresh out of fellowship,
Yep.
which is awesome, right? I mean, it's kind of you've got this new thing going. But you still can bring all the old stuff.
I feel really refreshed, and getting to apply a new body of knowledge and keep practicing new skills that's really exciting. I may have even commented a few times last year that a chance to get back to the bedside and enter that sacred space with patients and families, it was just, I don't think I ever took it for granted, but I think I'd forgotten how sacred it was. And I think if you're always working in healthcare all the time and don't have a break like I did, it might just feel like the same old. And it still doesn't, it still feels fresh to me, which is really, really fun. And and I also see now being kind of very much on the front lines, so far removed from, I see the names of the people from the old executive team, and I see their memos, and I kind of chuckle thinking about things that I know about them from the past, or fights I've had with them about budgets or other things. And I think, oh my God, this is so much more fun than what we did in the executive team. The pay isn't nearly as good, but boy, this is a lot more fun. And Marty knows a little bit about this from some of our Zoom lunches, but a year ago, before the pandemic, the system that I'm part of made this decision that people with big vacation balances from a merger, that they had to be used up by December 31st or be lost. And often they were staff who were so short-staffed they could never take time off. And so the palliative care team, of course, being the good-natured souls that they are, or the suckers, whatever, had monstrous balances. And so from when I joined the group on August 17th, we were never at full capacity, because these women who had been there 15, 20 years had these big balances. So, and they'd say to me, I don't want the first week of November off, but if I don't take it off, I lose it. I don't get paid for it. Yes. And I tried several times to escalate to say, we are being killed by this COVID pandemic. Can't you at least make an exception for this group of essential workers for your hospital? And the answer kept coming down, no, we've made a decision. We're not backing off from it. And I thought, God, how many times did I say something as stupid as that? To just fail to really, something that made a lot of sense in January 2020, that made zero sense in November and December of 2020. But you're going to stick to your guns because you don't want to seem like you're a wishy-washy, indecisive leader. And we paid for it. I mean, Rose, there were days in COVID hospital, I would have 30 people I'd be following up in 6 new consults, because it was that crazy. And do the best you can, but there's no help. There's no one else to come because the other person's doing 15 people in 3 new consults. But I think, have someone from HR just come and shadow me for a morning. And so I could just sort of try to make my case for them. And but it really made me stop and think, God, I must have made equally stupid, boneheaded decisions where I stuck to my guns that were equally, just karma. It's just payback.
it's huge that you've seen both sides. It really is, you
Yeah.
know, because I think
Yep.
those
So,
who always have done direct patient care are pretty good at saying bad stuff about the other side. But I think there's lots of pressures that go along with it.
yeah,
So, you
yeah.
know,
Yeah. Well, my colleagues say, why? They'll be these why questions to some, and I'll say, I can come up with a rationale. It won't sound vaguely even possibly true, even to me right now, but it would make sense in that conference room. You know, I can try to. Oh, I would, yeah, I don't, yeah. But it's tough to be a practicing leader. I mean, that's really, really hard place to be. It depends on the kind of medicine you're involved with. Some shift work, you can do that. But other things, it just isn't satisfying clinically or for patients and families. So it's tough.
I know we want to end with a poem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be a nice new little practice for these interviews. But I hate to not give you a chance to share a palliative care joke.
So, you know, there's a whole genre of Oli and Lena or Oli and Sven jokes in Minnesota. These kind of dumb Scandinavians.
Oh,
Sorry.
Scandinavian right here.
So Oli goes to his doctor to get some test results. And the doctor comes in kind of hurriedly. He's got an old paper file and he's flipping through and he says, "Oh my God, Oli, I feel really bad about this. I should have called you sooner about these results." And Oli says, "Oh my God, what's wrong? What is it?" And he says, these tests show that you only have 10 left to live, Oli. And Oli said, "What? 10 months, 10 weeks?" And the doctor said, 8, 7, 6.
Oh my gosh. That is dark.
Prognosis. Can I tell you my one really cool story from last fall that has stayed with me from a family member? I took care of this older Hmong woman, probably in her 70s, dying of heart failure before the hospital became COVID only. And we were allowing one designated visitor at a time for the whole stay. And it happened to be this man about my age who's just lovely, just a lovely man. And I just really resonated with him. And as I'm doing my sort of social history, I used that question from Francois, you know, but what are you famous for? What's your mom famous for? She couldn't participate in the conversation. And this man had told me that his mother had married at age 15 in a rural village in Laos. She had, in the next 15 years, she had 13 children, ages, you know, newborn to 14 or so. And she had, on her own, gotten these 13 children out of Laos after the communists took over. Her husband was off fighting with the sort of the freedom fighters now, sort of the American-backed allies. And it took them 2 attempts to get across the Mekong River. They were caught the first time and taken back. And then they went again to the river, got across, time in the camps. Then from the camps, they went to Southern California. And then after being there for about 15 years, her husband decided to uproot them and move them to Minnesota, where there's a big Hmong culture. So a lot of dislocation in this woman's life. And so I said, you know, so what is your mom famous for? And this guy got very reflective. And then he chuckled and said, "I bet you're hoping I'm going to say my mom was a really good cook." But she wasn't. She was not a good cook at all. He said, "But my mom had a very difficult life full of hardship. But my mom never had a quarrel with the world." And I was just blown away by that because I'd had 2 or 3 quarrels with the world just that morning, just from my, you know, I don't know if it's arrogance or just my expectations as an old white guy or whatnot, but I was just blown away by that humility and modesty you could have in the face of tremendous, tremendous challenge. It was just, never had a quarrel with the world. Really.
that's tough to do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
Wow.
Well,
I'm going to give you a poem.
yeah, send us off. Share a
So
poem with us.
I will. So 2 pieces of introduction. One is I teased you by saying, so I could read anything. So how about the Odyssey? And you give me a big thumbs up emoji, which was very kind of you, but you didn't take my bait necessarily. But last year, I spent a lot of time with Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem Ulysses. I may have read it 3 or 4 times a week to myself, partly because it's about an older guy yearning to, keep engaging with the world, but also about a lot of the older patients that we take care of and just their desire to keep going. They're not ready to kind of crawl in a hole and die. So, in a way. And then as I was pulling that up, and I will read it, there's also a poet named Marie Howe, who's written some beautiful pieces, including a long series of poems, which she calls a letter to her brother who died of AIDS back in the late 80s. Just a lovely, but she gave a quote on a Terry Gross Fresh Air show about 10, 15 years ago that I think really holds true for palliative care as well. She said, "Poetry holds the knowledge that we are alive and that we know we're going to die." And I think that's in palliative care, we hold both of those as very well. And that might be why at least poetry has resonated a lot more with me as I've grown older and more into palliative care. I think a lot of palliative people are into poetry too. But here's Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It little profits that an idle king by this still hearth among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone on shore, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vexed the dim sea. I am become a name, for always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known. Cities of men and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least, but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met. Yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. As though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things, and vile it were for some 3 sons to store and hoard myself, and this gray spirit yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor, by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I mine. There lies the port. The vessel puffs her sail. There gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine, and opposed free hearts, free foreheads. You and I are old. Old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, Some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows. For my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. I just find so much in this these days.
Well, thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. I'm really pleased that you thought I had something worth chatting about here for a bit. It's really great to see you guys.